What's going on, brother?
What's going on, Matt Roeske? Here we are again.
I was worried. I was like, I don't know if he knows I'm in here. That's what it was.
That's all right. No, I got everything right this morning, so I appreciate you coming back, man. I don't know what happened last time. Hey, I mean, like this internet thing was just like going wild for some reason. Everything was just going chaotic. So I appreciate you coming back on, man. How you been?
Good, good. It's a lot of chaos in the world right now, the typical of the nonsense that we deal with and everything else. But I think my computer should be good to go. And if you want to do an hour, that would be great
Yeah,
and
man.
rock and roll.
Yeah, I'm happy to go with the flow. I appreciate you coming on. I think the last time I was really just getting to know you and getting to know your work, which has been great to see your journey and to see all the different things that you're getting into. So I wouldn't mind exploring that a little further today, if that's okay with you, just to try and get
Cool.
a deeper understanding of, I don't know, I kind of like over the last 12 months of watching you and listening to some of the things that you go into. I I guess it's appealing the way your mind thinks around searching for answers, searching for deeper meaning and purpose, and the reason behind like why the world is shaped the way it is. Does that make sense to you when I say that?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. A
Yeah.
lot of the
So
time, I was going to say a lot of the times when I'm trying to find something, I'm always kind of going into the back of the book looking for more. I got a bunch of books behind me, but I'll go into the back of a book and look for more things and find more books and kind of go through and explore and then start breaking things down. But as you were saying, I didn't mean to
yeah,
cut you off.
no, it's like all good. But I think I wanted to sort of get an understanding from you because you have referenced certain pieces of information about, like for example, the mud, is it called the mud floods? There's sort of old worlds. There's types of depictions of eras that have sort of been hidden or omitted from the literature and knowledge and things like that. So buildings and all those sorts of things that have been constructed in the past, which to today's standard couldn't even be replicated. I mean, with today's knowledge and technology and tools and all those sorts of things, you just couldn't replicate that same architecture and design and all of those sorts of things. And there's a reasoning behind the way buildings were designed the way they were in terms of energy, in terms of like yeah, I think like when we talk about the copper domes and free energy and all those sorts of things. So, how do you find in a world which is constantly having information deleted from the interwebs, right? So, like you could research something last month, and this month it's almost the definitions have changed. There's things that have been omitted from the internet. You can't find it anymore. There's certain web browsers that just won't show you information. So, like, how do you kind of deep dive into all of this and find information that is legitimately true that you can kind of back up and reference to say that the source of this information is true and correct?
Well, it's funny you say that because we talked about electroculture before, and I talked about the newspaper articles on New South Wales and Australia and how they date back to 1835. And they were up on the websites of the archive. You can go on the archive and you can find these electroculture articles. They're gone. So, like you just said, this is what we're constantly facing is that certain things, as soon as they get talked about, as soon as somebody brings light to it, all of a sudden they're getting wiped off the internet. So the other option for people, because, there are options as well too, but finding old books, I'm really big on collecting older books, books before the 1920s, because you really see something different. People can look on eBay, they can look on vintage stores, they could go to thrift stores, there's old libraries who are getting rid of books but looking at old books because they tell you a different story. And they tell you, once you start seeing enough of them, you start to see the exact same thing over and over again. So, perfect example is what you're talking about, the old world. You see these cathedrals, these big buildings that are all granite and stone and just solid buildings that have survived like all these different, floods and fires and things like that. And you sit there and go, wow, this is during a horse and wagon time. You know,
Yeah.
people are on horse and wagon, they have their little hammer and chisel, and they're allegedly building all these buildings. And it's interesting because I found a book that was going through the world fairs, which the world fairs were resets that took place. They would hold an event, then reset that place, get rid of everything, and teach somebody something new to buying from like Coca-Cola, Hershey's, and things like that. But when you look at these buildings, there's all these books I found where they talked about each building was like 8 acres, 8 to 10 acres. And they would say it was like 1,000 square feet by 1,000 square feet. And you're going, what? Somebody was building this in, the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s. Now you're going back like candlelight and a horse and a chariot, all that whole story and whatever. So, you start seeing all these things and you start seeing flaws. And the perfect thing that I looked into the Gulag camps and that whole, it's a very horrendous thing, but they were building these canals in Russia and they used like 150,000 to 200,000 people to build just one canal. And they said that it didn't even work properly after they built it. So you think you had all that manpower, you used years of time, resources, all of that, and it didn't even come out correctly. Yet you see these cathedrals, these old world buildings, these beauties that are just remarkable and they're flawless. They don't have a
Mm.
single error. And that's where I started to realize when I went and saw these cathedrals in New York City and all these different places, I started realizing this doesn't make any sense. Like this is crafted out of pure stone with perfect, perfect designs and perfect acoustics and different materials and different colors and all of these things. And I started realizing this doesn't make where'd you get all this from? Were you mining this? Were you just, pulling this out of the earth? And, and that's why like right now, obviously yesterday after we talked and we were saying about like crazy things happening, the port strike thing happened, in over in New York and New Jersey,
Oh
and
yeah.
that's supposed to sever, materials moving. And I'd use this as a perfect example. If you were trying to build the infrastructure in which we have seen in the past, these big buildings and all of these things, imagine moving something, imagine the transportation needed to move something, imagine the people, the horses, people have to be fed. That's like another one. There's got to be a lot of food. All of these things that like you sit and don't kind of think about. Even like the just having a light bulb. Like here, you just turn on the light so you can work at nighttime. You might have a lamp or maybe a candle light, but those things don't
Yeah.
equate to the same amount of extension of light that you're having. So, through all of this, I've started to go through these old books and look at old books, pick up an old book, go to the back of the book, and look for more additional books to find. And then I'll use different search engines such as DuckDuckGo, such as Quant, such as Yandex, such as Brave Browser, such as Start Page, all these different ones so that I can find information as well. Because what most people don't know is like Google just wipes everything. They censor like 2/3 of all the information. You try typing something in, they don't even send you to what you're trying to look for. So, using different search engines is key, finding old books. And also, I mean, if you want, take notes, so that you have a reference. Because, like you said, you might sign on tomorrow and all of a sudden it just doesn't
Oh,
say that. Or download the web pages and save them onto your computer. And you can upload them to a website called archive.org that has older websites that date back 20 and 30, 40, 50 years so that you can still see this reference of these things. But it's wild. The internet, I've realized, is completely crazy when you get into it.
fuck yeah. Yeah, it is just mind-boggling to think that your the the kind of landscape of the world, the lens that you're viewing it through is curated to only show you what they want you to see. Like that there's information, like you said, you can even type certain things in and it won't even take you to that thing. It'll just take you to whatever the narrative might be, and you're like, how the fuck did I get here when I'm just not even searching for these things, so yeah, it's pretty crazy. Have you ever been overseas? Have you ever seen some of the, like, you've been to Italy and looked at some of the big buildings and churches and things like that?
I saw a bunch of them in Europe when I traveled over there about like 10, 15 years ago, but I didn't
Mm.
know what I was seeing.
Yeah, sure.
That's the thing is like when you see it again and then you understand it, it's very different. And I just got back from New York City and we saw all the cathedrals, and these old world buildings, and they completely you see, square boxes of steel, and then
Mm.
you just see this stone crafted structure with copper and on the
Yeah.
roof and gold and brass, and you're just like, and then you see squares,
Yeah.
so you see how like out of place these things are. And yeah, that's what it draws you in. And like through some of these, let me grab one of these. So like through some of these books, just over time, seeing things like that. And this
Mm.
same building, was in every city across the entire world. You see this same exact building. These can harness energy, atmospheric energy at the top because of the antenna at the top. But these buildings were everywhere. And this structure of how they were designing things and how they were building things was everywhere. And then they turned them into little events like this. You can see that,
Mm.
like little circus events, and entertained people while they demolished a lot of this stuff and got rid of it because they had to teach a new narrative. And that's what I realized history is. History is whoever is the winner, they teach you the story. And
Yeah.
then they just tell you that, this is what these were the people who live there. And even by you have the Aborigines and everybody who's got the ties to the ancient cultures and the ties to the ancient information, and a lot of them have been wiped out, and they wipe them out for a reason so that somebody can't see another side. And that's
Yeah.
what I realized with history. You never see the opposing side. And once you start seeing it, you're just mind blown going, wait a minute, what? I got totally duped. That horse and wagon story, that was cute, and whatever else.
Yeah. It's crazy because, like you said, about when you look at the structures. So when the last I was in Europe, and I don't know if it's just my mind in terms of how it is in curiosity sense, but I come from a family of builders, so you kind of look at structure and architecture and things like that, and you look at the logistics. I think straight away of the logistics of how a column, for example, out of solid stone, which is, I don't know, 18 meters tall, could be just delivered in order to be molded and sculpted into this, beautiful column. Yeah. And there's not just one, there's like 18. So I just think it's impossible. Even today's cranes and hydraulic systems and things that we have would struggle to get that thing in one piece to a certain location. And then you think, well, where did they get that from? Because that would have to be quarried out of some fucking mountain somewhere. And then you look around, it's like, well, where is that mountain? It doesn't make any sense. And then the other thing, which is just a natural conclusion, it's like, why don't they build stuff that is like that anymore? Where are these people that are sharing these skills and knowledge? And you think, it's like Graham Hancock says, we're a species with amnesia. There seems to be forgotten timelines along the way, which, yeah, just sort of like delete certain periods of time. And then you almost do this full leap back into archaic times where, like you said, you got horse and cart and things like that. But that depiction of one era and then the current paradigm doesn't marry up. There's none of it makes sense anymore.
Well, and I like how you said that because if you go with timelines, you had a group of people over here living in a teepee or a hut, or a little mud hut, and then you have people over here who are living in something that they don't even realize what they're living in. Like I have video footage where they're walking around these like Coliseum-looking buildings all over the different parts of the United States and multiple Coliseums in multiple parts of the United States,
Yeah.
and you can see that the people don't even realize what they're walking around. And
Yeah.
like you just said, it's not just one, tower. You don't just see one tower. You see 20 of them. You see 20 domes. You see all the copper that is on top. You see the antennas that are on top, which usually have gold and brass,
Yes.
mercury, and all these different precious metals. So then you're going, okay, how'd you get those up there? How'd
How
you
much would
move?
they weigh? They would weigh tons. Like, it's just, how did you get it 18 meters into the air and place it perfectly in that position? It's mind-boggling.
When I was in New York City, it's called the Natural History Museum, and they have all these collections of rare stones and everything. And when I walked into the place, the guy said, because I asked for directions, he's like, just so you know, you're on the second floor. And I said, the second floor? I'm like, why aren't we on the first floor? And he's like, well, you walked up the steps. So I said, oh, okay. So he's like, yeah, you have to go downstairs if you want to go, to the bottom floor. And I thought, oh, okay. So now we're on the second floor of things, which if you start thinking about what we're standing on right now, start to think, okay, there's a lot of stuff underground. There's tunnels and all types of layers underground. So what level are we on? And this is
Yeah.
where it gets even crazier because now you're sitting there thinking, okay, you got houses, with little windows like that are like at the ground level. Water would pour in them and flood if you built like that in the first place. And then, but these buildings, when they start, pulling all the dirt out and everything else, they start finding more layers of them underneath. And the museum guy also said, because I was like, oh, what's the building made out of? Because he said this was like an older building and it's an old world building like the rest of them. He's
Mm.
like, it's pure 100% travertine. I was like
Yeah.
100% travertine. You just, I mean, I collect a lot of stones. I know how they feel. I know how heavy they feel. Like I picked up limestone. I know exactly how that feels and things like that.
Mm.
And it's like, oh, okay. So you just millions of pounds of just travertine have appeared. And then you've used it to now craft and
Yep.
and sculpt, and that's the other part. When you get into the sculpting of these things, that's flawless. It's completely flawless. There's not one single error. And like
Yes.
you said, if somebody had this ability or could do these things or build this way, why are we not doing that? Why are
Mm.
we making plastic, which makes no sense, using Rockefeller Petroleum and all that garbage, making plastic and doing things like that, concoctions? We got rid of hemp, because that was a competition to the plastic. And then we use all the synthetic materials and everything else and build with things that don't even make any sense. And it's like if we could build that way, we could be building things like, for example, there was the hurricane in North Carolina, and there's a lot of water, a lot of things moving through. Well, water takes everything, but stone stays in place.
Mm.
So if we were to be like, building things to protect ourselves from alleged, weather things and whatever else, it's another rabbit hole. But if we were, we would be using the materials so that it could withstand these things. And we don't do that. And they say it's based on price, and whatever. But okay, how do we even get that many resources? We
Yeah.
don't even have the ability to have those resources,
That's right.
let alone do it,
Yeah.
because we
Make it
got to
make
come.
sense.
Exactly. That's why it's a funny rabbit hole when you start looking at pictures of buildings that are, 8 acres, 100 feet by 1,000 feet by 1,000 feet. And I
Yeah.
even found in the St. Louis World Fair, every building was 8 acres, 8 to 10, some were 30 acres. Then you're sitting there going, you have a 30-acre building? And what's wild is all of these buildings were demolished. They were burned down. They were hit with TNT. They said they got rid of them because they couldn't upkeep them. And this is all throughout the realm. Every
Mm.
country and every city you go into, you'll see these buildings. They just look very out of place. They look from the olden times, they'll tell you, but they don't seem to fit up to the narrative.
Yeah. Man, you would have a field day here in Australia because if you go to Sydney, the city of Sydney, and you look at all of the buildings which the windows are at the floor level. So when you're walking on the sidewalk, the window in the window sill might be kind of like, I don't know, in say half a foot or 30 centimeters off the ground. And you're like, why would you build a window that is 30 centimeters off the ground? Because if there was any kind of, deluge of water or anything like that, you would just, that would be the first place that the water would hit and it do damage. It doesn't make any sense. And then when you think about a lot of these buildings that have basement levels, 2 basement levels, then you find out that there's tunneling systems and it just starts to get wild. But even more to your point, if you were to come to my hometown of Wollongong in the Illawarra, you would go down to, say, the south coast, right? And everything in the Illawarra area is like 5 kilometers wide, and then it stretches along the coast, and then you kind of opened out into what was, farmland. So you go to these little country towns, and you'll see the kind of, I don't know what you would call it in America, but in Australia, you have these sort of fibro shacks. You know, they're just old homes. They're level on the ground, and it's a lot of farm area. It's very expansive, and everyone's just like in cattle and dairy and all that kind of stuff,
Makes
right?
sense.
But in the middle of all of that are these what now would be like hotels and these Art Deco sort of era. And you walk into these buildings, and the original part of the building, which is still kept intact and everything's been added onto with their hotel rooms, you walk in and the door is 4 meters tall, right? So you go in and it's like 4 meters tall, and it opens up into this grand room, and every room has a different design on the ceiling, and there's this beautiful timber that's used everywhere. Everything's like all stone and brick and render, and it's just so high. You're like, if you and I, like, I don't know how tall you are, but like I'm 6'5". No, I'm not. I'm like 5'9", right? So you walk in, let's say the average height was around 6 feet. Why would you need a 4 meter entrance? Like what the fuck is that for? Why are all the ceilings 4 to 6 meters tall? Why do you need something that grand in order to like just have a, and this would have been someone's home. It wouldn't have been for any other use to my knowledge. So it, again, this is like, it doesn't make sense that that building in the middle of nowhere is still standing, and it is in the structure and the grandeur of what it is. It doesn't marry up with anything else around it. Everything else is fibro and timber, and it's like a bush shack in the middle of nowhere. You with me?
Yeah, and that's what I've seen a lot. Like when I was looking at photos from New York City in 1883, number one, there were no people walking around, which I thought was really interesting. Big buildings, massive buildings, no people walking around, none on the street, nothing at all, which is strange. So, like you said, in the area that you were just talking about, if you're building something, they're probably building just a little house so that you survive. They're farming. They got to keep moving and they got to do that. They're not building this grand 30-floor building, that they decide to put up just for tomorrow so they can house everybody and whatever.
Yeah.
But I like how you said that because, yeah, I saw that when I was in the St. Thomas Cathedral in New York City. The doors are massive. They're 20, 30 feet, 40 feet. And you're sitting there thinking, okay, what do you need that for? And when I went to India, actually, I went to these different castles, and they had massive doors, just absolutely massive. And they had this like chariot that had these wheels that was like it literally looked the size of an elephant, like just the chariot alone. And I
Mm.
sat there and thought, what are you pulling? Like, what would be sitting on that thing? Because this thing's already bigger, like than my arm span and tall, whatever else. This thing already looks the size of an elephant. Then I'm sitting there thinking, what would be sitting on top of that chariot and like being pulled? And then now you're saying, when we get into it, if you have these big doors, something very large or someone very large must be walking through these doors because if
Yeah.
you look at, like you said, the average person 6 feet tall, why would you be building 34, 30, 40 fit, 50
Yeah.
foot doors? The
Why?
resources to do it, again, you need
Yeah.
big trees too, because if you think about it, if you're going to build it in one piece, you need a big piece of tree. And then that kind of connects you into these big, massive trees that used to, exist all over the realm. There's still some ones in the sequoia tree, in the sequoia forest, but then we have to start thinking about that. You look at some of these mountains, like we have four peaks over here. It looks like just a tree. Like it used to be a tree and they chopped it, and then now it's just a mountain.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of things are missing in our realm. And then when you start to break it down, like me and you are doing right now, none of it makes any sense. And
No.
like you said, at a time where like, the plagues and people are like trying to survive and then they get in like dysentery and sick and whatever else. It's like, so then why would you be building that? Like,
Yeah.
unless the only one option I could think of is you have a king and you want him to have some grand door,
Sure.
but then every door is that size, every single place. Like, it's obnoxiously inefficient and doesn't make sense. And that's what I started to realize when I started to look at all of these buildings for the timeline that they were telling us and what was possible and people who build and people who make things and people who are carpenters and everybody. There's some part that everybody starts going, wait a minute, that doesn't even add up. So
Yeah. There's so many things, so many variations and variables that you can go down, which again just don't compute. Because when I look at these constructions that I was talking about, you think, Well, I'm kind of familiar with people building new homes in the area, and I know that from the time that they demolish an old home or they've got a flat block of land and then they start turning soil and putting down the slab and then getting the frames up and then getting the gyprock in and then bricking it up and all that kind of stuff. It's probably 12 to 18 months by the time they finish it all, right? And that's with everything that is, at Bunnings, for example. Like you can just go to like a Home Depot or whatever and get the timber and then take it over there. So the resources that they would need in order to have this construction and build it in a reasonable time for someone to occupy. And then given the fact that we're told that the average lifespan was like, I don't know, 40 or something like that, like no one lived past sort of 50 years of age because, we're so backwards in terms of medicine and all those sorts of things. Again, like none of it makes sense. The thing that spins me out the most was when you commented on one of my stories on Instagram where I was down by the lighthouse. So our like where I live here on the coast, there's a little coffee shop, nice little beach area. We go down there all the time, walk my dog. Sundays are spent down there on a nice sunny day. But you pointed out the lighthouse is where it was a docking station for the blimp. Is that right?
Yeah,
Is that
for
what they call it? The air.
the blimps, they were called blimps, airships, drigables, I think it's drigables, and then
Yep.
zeppelins. Those are the four different names that they had. But
Yes,
go
the
ahead.
Zeppelin comes to mind. It was massive in size, and so they used to anchor them there, and then everyone would just, and it would house, I don't know, hundreds of people, and they would just, that would be the that would be a means of transportation. So
Pretty
that
much.
spins me
I mean,
out.
it was the Rolls Royce of transportation because you could be able to have a piano bar in there. You had a library in these blimps. They had a dance floor. They had a coffee bar. I mean, you traveled in style when you were flying around on these blimps. And the other thing you have to think about the lighthouse. I had an old book on lighthouses, and it was funny because they said they got like 100 men together and they moved this massive lighthouse out into the ocean, and then they just pulled it, like they pulled it with a rope, they basically said, and they pulled it all the way out into the ocean and somehow placed it in and whatever. And I sat there and thought, oh, okay, that's what it was. It was just hard work. We just don't work hard enough. That's what probably did it. But the interesting things of these lighthouses is they would be able to be connected to these blimps, and people could then travel, and be all these different places. And you see these lighthouses like out in the middle of the ocean, just floating, just embedded in rock. And you have to think of also the challenge to put something there. And in this book I was reading, it was saying that there were three more floors underneath the lighthouse that go into the rock, and you could like go down in the basement. So then I'm like, okay, you're in the lighthouse in the ocean, three floors down, and then the book was saying it was like the 1700s. So I'm like, you guys are just
Yeah.
so advanced, and we just turned so stupid so fast in such a short amount of time.
That's exactly
You know,
right.
and just that's, and when you look at the blimps and you think about these things, Germany was big with the blimps, with the Zeppelins and things like that. But blimps went away because they were a very easy way to transport people. You could move packages. People could see from above what's kind of going on, because you can actually see what's going on.
Yeah.
And they were they're connected to helium, and then they're connected to radium, and they're connected to just easy energy sources that don't require much. Like a couple gallons, even a couple gallons of gas, you could go the distance. So, you start to sit there and go, well, now it makes sense why these blimps, there was an incident and they started to go away. And you see this a lot with like these crystal palaces. If people look up crystal palaces, they're just these huge domed crystal palaces of just pure glass. That's where they would house the blimp. The blimp would actually just move right into there, and they would house it there, and then they would come out of that. And
Wow.
so you see that when we talk about size or magnitude of these buildings, you see that they had something big, and these blimps were gigantic. And you see that people understood this technology. And during the 1880s to the 1910, a lot of the times it's people rediscovering the technology that was already here. Like after this Carrington event of 1859, it seems like most of it is just the rediscovery of technology, which was already here. And then people are just throwing their names on it. They're like, oh, well, this is mine. I'm a blimp creator. I'm a Rolls Royce, which the Rolls Royce also, those engines in the Maybachs were in the blimps. So somehow someone
Wow.
just knew, I'll just make that, but then I'll sell you a car and whatever else. So you see how a lot of these things are tied, but the lighthouse thing is fascinating. And the other interesting thing about the lighthouse is the glass that they would use inside the lighthouse, and they would put mercury in it, and it would be able to reflect. And they said that it was used to, shine off the ships and whatever else. But if you start to think about it as a self-defense, type of building as well, you could think of how you could defend yourself by aiming, beams of light towards something such as the sun. And
Mm.
we see that a lot of times where places get cooked, beaming of the sun can be a part of that. So lighthouses are quite a rabbit hole, that's for sure.
Yeah, 100%. So the natural question to come of all of this is why? So why do you think that, I mean, if I was to say, like, there's a tone that's sort of emanated a lot through at the last couple of years, particularly with the pandemic and all of these things that are going on, and I like a lot of prophecies and things that have been depicted in the past and are coming true now. So I have a a romantic sort of fascination with all of that, because it's just so interesting that something could be said 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and then today it's actually coming true. So I have a fascination with how that would work within the splices of time and all of those sorts of things. But to sort of digress back to the original statement, is like, when a lot of people are saying these days they planned it, or that's what they want you to see, and there's all this sort of like cloak and dagger around like who they are. But you've just rattled off 15 things that have happened in our history that are still present, so you can still see it. It hasn't been completely wiped or demolished or burned down or destroyed in any way, so you can see it. And if you're critical enough to think this is out of place in the time frame that we are currently living in, when you've got two splices of time running side by side, it still does beg the question as to, like, why do you think we have this constant pattern of man evolution of man getting to the point where we're so smart, and we've got all this architecture, and we've got these tools, and we've got ways of cutting stone and travel and all this kind of stuff, and then it just disappears. Then you regress a century, and then it starts all over again, and then all of a sudden we're back to another moment in time which has new buildings and new technologies and new ways of being and all that kind of stuff, and then it starts all over again. Why do you think that is?
I mean, I think it's part of your life's journey, like your soul's journey. You're here to just learn. Like if you think about it, you're here to experience things and to learn. And part of this is an experience. Like you signed up to come in at this time in 2024 or whatever day it really is, because the calendars are wrong. But 2024, and you just signed up to be here. And that's pretty much what it is. And people are on perpetual loops. If you think of like soul cycles or life cycles, they're in perpetual loops. And history is perpetual loops. Like everything we see today is the same stuff from the 1970s, the strikes, same thing as the 70s,
Yeah.
same thing as the nonsense of 2020 was 1970s, 1920s, same repeats. And people, if they don't remember, they keep having the amnesia, like you said, and
Yeah.
then seeing and going, oh my gosh, what is this? But once you start to remember, you start to see a different path. And I think that's the path that separates the timelines, like you were saying. There's one path right now where a lot of people are going into the nonsense and the chaos. And there's another path which is pretty much awakening and realizing all the truth and seeing another side. And that path is causing people to divide and be on two different sides automatically. So technically, if you really think about it, people are living in two different simulations at the same time. And this is why I say like perception is nuts, because me and you can stand outside. I can say they're spraying the skies, and you can tell me it's cloudy.
Mm.
And that's crazy when you think about it, because that means that both of our perceptions, based on the simulation in which we're living, we're both seeing two different outcomes, which is totally mind blowing. So
Yeah.
then you think of these timelines that people are living in as you're opening the eyes and seeing this truth and seeing these buildings and seeing this architecture and understanding it, it's tapping into your soul. You're tapping into the past. And if we ask why a lot of this was destroyed and rewritten and we're told the different narrative and whatever, it's because they don't want people asking questions. Think about it. Like if me and you went downtown by you and all of a sudden saw all these old buildings when we hit like in our 30s or whatever, 40s, whatever, start asking questions and be like, who built all this? And I mean, imagine the tourism from all of these things and who were these people and why are the doors so big? And one question leads to another because you can't stop asking questions because inevitably our minds are wired to figure things out and understand and try to break things down from a different way. And they have spent like these groups of Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Federal Reserve, the bankers. It's usually the bankers. That's what it comes down to. Bankers run all kinds of things. But they have spent time rewriting the history, destroying buildings, having resets, orchestrating wars, orchestrating revolutions, everything, so that they could get rid as much as they can. But the thing is there's so much that's everywhere. Like they just found these massive boulders up in Montana. It's like a whole wall. And this guy went out in his backyard and he's like, what the heck is this? I didn't even know this thing existed. So there's so much that they can't get rid of it all. And then once they, for example, stop, digging or stop looking things up, people start asking questions. Kind of like I believe in Turkey, they have like the oldest, I forget what that place is, Gobekli Temple or
Yep.
Tempe.
Temple.
That's like one of the oldest spots. They just said that they're going to stop digging and come back to it 100 years from now. And
Yeah.
people who are in that realm are like, what are you talking about? We just discovered, the beginning of time and whatever. So I think just naturally, humanity's curiosity is just what will keep just opening up the rabbit holes. And the internet, personally, in my opinion, is what started all of this. Because once you see something from another side, start asking questions about another thing and another thing and another thing. It's like, versus the
Yep.
stuff they were teaching you in school was so boring, so dulling, dulling to your soul and your brain and waste of time that you start seeing this and going, wow, that would make sense. And then you start to get into it. Like when I started getting into these materials, I started collecting these materials. I started collecting like petrified stones and all of these. I'll grab one. But like all of these beautiful things that are petrified. And if
Mhm.
you look at that, that looks like a brain. That looks exactly like a brain.
Yeah, right.
And that's a petrified quartz crystal that happened in Florida. So
Mhm.
now, if we want to take it a whole nother step further to what we're kind of thinking about as we have this conversation of something that looks like a brain, now we have to ask, well, what events took place on this realm which could have changed something like these buildings we just talked about from one material into another?
Yeah.
And this is stuff where it gets even deeper in this question of what has taken place on this realm that we have no idea. Like static field events, where all of a sudden, all of these items, let's say cathedrals, old world buildings, everything, all used to be made out of this and now have transferred and been turned into stone or have been transferred and been turned into quartz.
Mm.
Where this is where it gets crazy. And petrification, there was a guy named Stelium 7 and he actually did a video on how you could he reposted another one, but you could petrify something with a microwave. This guy was making rubies with a microwave. So then you start to sit there and think, okay, in real time, things can become petrified, things can change. And
Mm.
these are all, and this obviously led to a very open-ended question that leads to a lot of rabbit holes. But the whole point of that is that there's so many things that we start asking after question when you just start unraveling one thing at a time. And the whole reason, in my opinion, it's been set up this way is because it's like a riddle. It's like trying to figure out a riddle and trying to figure out what you're living on and what is this and everything else. It's really just breaking things down and little piece by piece. It feels like people are slowly putting the pieces together, going, wait a minute, okay. Like you said, why are we building this garbage that falls apart, gets hit by a little water, all of a sudden it's gone, when
Mm.
they were building these big stone cathedrals, we'll say, that are still dated from the 1500s.
Yeah.
They didn't have any like weather events. Then it makes you wonder about weather too and how seasons or if seasons are what they're supposed to be, and if we're even supposed to have them. And that's another rabbit hole as well.
Yeah. So from what you're telling me, when you talk about it's our soul's journey, so when you talk about the simulation, I was talking to David Icke about the simulation a couple of weeks ago, and it is another fascinating rabbit hole to go down. But when you start to debunk whether it is actually a possibility or not, these conversations like this make it seem that it is more of a reality than not, that there is some sort of simulation. Because like you said, you can look at the world one way, I can look at the same world, and it's completely opposite. And if we look at the last 4 years, for example, there are still people today, even though I was just saying this morning to my partner that um, some information that has been put out on Australia's public, what's it called, like medical boards and stuff like that. You know, the TGA, Therapeutic Goods of Australia, all those sorts of things. And they're listing all of the side effects of like the COVID-19 jab, for example, right? And it's all the things that people like you and I were saying 4 years ago that was happening, but now it's all listed. So, but even in and the reason why I use that example is even in the midst of all of this exposure and all this truth coming out about what actually happened and what it did and how people were sort of duped into taking something that they didn't need, you can still go into the street today and someone will fight you to the end of their days about how it was all necessary and they've taken 6 of these things and they're totally fine and no one around them has suffered, and I'm the idiot for thinking that anything's ever different. And that's when you realize we are living in 2 different realities. There is a reality that I'm walking through. It's almost like that movie They Live, you know, when he lifts the sunnies up and all the rest of it. Like, we are living in 2 different realities. I see the world through one lens and someone else sees the world through another. But I guess if I can summarize what you're thinking, we have a soul's journey, and when the closer you get to tapping into what your meaning and purpose of your particular soul's journey is starts to open up your pathway through this reality, you could say, this timeline. And people like you and I, for example, we are kind of like rising to a level of vibration, and we're meeting each other at the same splice in time. Is that probably a bad way of explaining it, but am I on the right path of how you think about what your meaning and purpose in life and how you're supposed to navigate through this, you know, shenanigans of particularly what's going on the last couple of years?
I mean, I would say that that's a really good way to say it, because we are on the same wavelength with every thought that we're having. And I
Yeah.
feel like that is just increasing. I mean, even when I was talking about looking at the eclipse without the glasses on, I realized that's a download. You know, if you see 50 eclipses, you just had 50 downloads. That's why they tell you not to look at them. So if you start to think about it, like you said, doing the opposite of everything that you're told really starts to give you a different world that you're living in. And you really start to see that it's a completely different path. And then you start to meet people, which this is where it gets like even more mind blowing. Start meeting people on the same path who understand the same things, and you're like, you know, the same things that I know, and what? Start having a conversation, and it's like, yeah, I already researched that. You should look into whatever. And you
Yeah.
start to see this and go, wow, okay, so there's a whole different wavelength over here that's just not being shown. And what I realized is this wavelength has increased because of the internet. Because like right now I'm in Arizona and you're in Australia. Like we're on 2 sides, you know, whatever, of the earth,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
But you know, we're on 2 different areas and we can be able to communicate, but we're on the same wavelength. The same wavelength is resonating amongst us. And there's so many of the people on that, but they just couldn't find each other. That's actually kind of what I started to think about it. They just couldn't find each other until the internet has gotten to the point that it's gotten. And even
Mm.
with your podcast and my thing with Cultivate Elevate, like we connected. We posted same things, and all of a sudden we're on pretty much the same wavelength. And I started to realize this is why there was a speech yesterday with John Kerry, and he was saying that freedom of speech is a threat to democracy. And I thought, that's a really interesting way of saying it. You mean freedom of speech, me and you talking and giving different sides to something, is a threat to tyranny. Because now you no longer can control, that's what he said too, control every narrative in which people are listening to from one side. Now he said, this is what gets funny, that our conversation that we just had today is fake, misinformation, and false leading. But all we're doing is seeing another side. And that's where I realized when you start to see another side, you start to also connect with other people who are all on that same wavelength. And I realized there's a lot of them. There's a lot more people on this side who actually understand it than the other side. But we've been broadcasted, and it's a frequency the entire time. Light bulbs, frequency, television, frequency, radio waves, frequency. It's all frequency. It's a bandwidth that people are
Mm.
then absorbing and taking in. And what's happening is because we are broadcasting at a different frequency, it's changing all of that. It's
Yeah.
breaking it up. It's actually causing a lot of static and noise. And that's why they're so mad. And that's why they want to censor everybody. Because all of a sudden people are like, wait a minute, you know what? I don't agree with you like anymore. And then they're like, oh, we can't have all these people disagreeing, but that's a different wavelength. And then you meet people, yeah, and if you get into Akashic records and your soul records and people you've met people who you already knew before. You're not meeting them for the first time. A lot of times people meet somebody, they go, I already met you. We're like best friends. You already knew the person. You're just back in that loop. Here we go again. And now we're just on this journey to do it and try to, have the life experience that we're trying, and then also learn from what we can. And that's what I realized pretty much I feel like life really just is. And we're here to exist, help create, help bring positivity, and be all, as much as we can for positivity. And that's what we're here to do.
Mm.
Otherwise, all we are is on the other side, which is trying to cause destruction and chaos. And then, like we said, take all this information that we just talked about away from us.
Yeah. If you know anything about energy and frequency and waves, fields, all those sorts of things, like it can also be distorted. And you've spoken about this about music, how it's sort of like dialed down to 440 hertz instead of 432. Is that right? Have I got that right? So
Yeah, the Rockefellers changed the music from 432 hertz to 440 hertz so that
440.
people would get angry and irritable. That's pretty
Yes.
much what
So
it
there's
was.
a distortion, and you can sense that now that the internet is the way it is. You can sense the distortion. You can see with, like, for example, 5G and 6G. I was watching a little clip the other day about 6G having the ability to sort of read into like brain waves, and it can kind of like download thoughts and maybe send you an ad based on what you're thinking, which is like pretty fucking scary. But I really think I agree with what you're saying about the internet, because when I've been in on the internet marketing and business and all that kind of stuff for the last 15 years or so. But in particular, when the pandemic happened and I started to sort of stick my neck out and talk about a few things that were counter narrative, so to speak, I really found that frequency that you talked about was more truer in that moment than ever before in my life, because you had this sort of, whatever was a distortion was almost pushed away, and you could feel that it was like coming at you. But the more I started to stay in my own lane and kind of like gravitate towards people like yourself, more of those people showed up. So it's almost like you could call it popularity, but the way that I was becoming known, it was 5 times greater than what it was when I was in a particular field, a particular energy or a particular vibration. So that sort of got me so far. And then the moment I started to connect on this level, it just went like this. And I know that's happened to you because you've had your accounts deleted a couple of times and all those sorts of things. But that is, yeah, I really wholeheartedly believe that. And I think the internet, although I said at the outset, it is curated, so we're seeing what the narrative wants us to see, like in terms of political ideals and gender and all that kind of stuff. You can just see how everything's been manipulated and distorted to carry one particular message. But at the same time, they can't stop the flow of this information. Like you and I, in order to be able to have this conversation 35 years ago or 30 years ago, it's impossible. We couldn't connect. And the only time I could do like somewhat of a networking event, I might have 5 to 15 people in a room, or I might have 30 or 40 people in a room. Whereas, we can do this right now and it's you and I, but the people that are listening to this, it could be hundreds, it could be thousands, it could be tens of thousands of people. And all of a sudden, we're filling stadiums and auditoriums of people, which you could just never do in the past.
Yeah, there's such a connection that was established during that time, and it was Tom Barnett was big by you. I remember when he put his videos up and they went nuts, and
Yeah.
people were like, he doesn't believe in viruses, and then people were like ripping him apart, and he's like, dude,
He got
I can tell
destroyed.
you the
Yeah.
truth, like it's nonsense. But it was so funny. His video went nuts, and then Collins and a bunch of other people after that. But it just it just resonates, and it's funny because just watching one video is a frequency that just may resonate with you, and then it just kind of starts going from there. But yeah, the internet was, I think that's just part of it, and that 2020 nonsense just really pushed it because
Yeah.
obviously people already knew things and truthers and whatever been learning in rabbit holes and whatever, but that one pushed it to the max. And I think the energy was so cranked up, and then people were pushed into such of a situation that they also started to realize, okay, this is for real. Like I have to know this. And that's why I feel like it'll never go back. Like they'll be like, oh, it's going to be whatever. No, no, no. Like the people have changed their ways permanently for what they're doing. Like even with supporting certain brands, certain businesses, certain whatever, they've changed completely. Places that are going out of, let's say, business or whatever, it's like, yeah, because nobody really wanted that in the first place. People just are more aware now. They're hyper aware of these things. And I think that just the beautiful part of the internet is that we can connect on these things and have that ability. When they wanted it as the web, because it's a web, to
Yeah.
control the information, it's like, yeah, but you can't control everything. Because now, here's the other option. Are you going to turn it off? You're going to block people from the internet? Well, what's
Mm.
going to happen? People are going to get mad that they now lost what they just had for X amount of time. So you're in this really fine line, and then they think like now with AI, that will like solve whatever. It's like that's actually now you just are going more, towards nonsense and censorship, but also someone can just take that same technology that you created, make another one that's open source and decentralized, and people
Right.
can just find the information again. So it's like if we think of this whole, even everything we've talked about today with even history, like they have tried to, bury all of this information. And even these books, found a
Mm.
book yesterday from 1855. Like these books they've tried to get rid of, but somehow people still have them. Like someone
Resurface.
listed it up and I was like, what's
Yeah.
the chance? And I'm writing my book and I wanted to put a section in here for the book. And I was like,
Yeah.
what is the chance that it's actually available today? It wasn't available in 2020 or 2021 or 2023,
That's
but it
right.
was available now. And I thought, wow, it's just interesting how, like you said, it's just a wavelength. And
Mm.
just when you're kind of tapped in, how it just keeps tapping in more. And that path just works that way. And you just feel like my path now just feels like what I'm supposed to do. Like it
Right.
just feels natural. I don't feel like I have to like, I don't know. I never really felt I had to be anybody different than I am, but just in general, I just can let it flow. And I feel like that's what my path is and to help. And I hope that it can help somebody. But that's what happened with me. Like I
Right.
had my health issues, I had my problems, and I started doing my own research. And all of a sudden I was like, wow, I've been lied to on everything. Just like straight up.
What an awakening. Everything's a lie.
Hmm.
Were you a disagreeable kid as like when you were younger? Were you kind of like a rebellion, or did you stay inside the lines all the time? Were you a little goody two shoes, or were you a rambunctious child? What were you like?
So I used to get in trouble in school all the time for talking too much,
Mm.
which we can know that, obviously.
Yep.
And then, yeah, I really never paid attention much. I did really well in school for up to like third or fourth grade. And then I just kind of stopped caring altogether. But I just was really bored, like I would spend more time trying to figure out how to not do something, like get out of it, than
Yeah.
actually doing it. And I would like fake things with my computer and like pretend the file's been corrupted, and I would like type, A, B, C, D, E, F, G on the screen so that it looks like it printed like, the paper printed like that or whatever.
Yeah.
Just goofy things. I found Wingdings, that font that everybody used to have or whatever, and play with that. But like I just used to mess around because I just couldn't take it seriously. And now I feel that my calling, like what I do now, which is researching and information and education and teaching, it just feels natural. It just feels great. And I really enjoy what I do versus I would just go to school and I'd fall asleep. Like the first two classes, I'd fall asleep. And then after that, maybe I would, try to order a pizza or something to the school or something. Just silly
Yes,
things.
that's crazy.
Yeah,
What
that's my
does
life.
a day in the life of Matt Roeske look like now? What do you do on a daily basis? What are you doing business wise? You just mentioned before you're writing a book, which is fantastic. Obviously, you've got a few things going on with all the content that you do. Like, what does that look like?
There's a bunch. With the book, it's taken a lot of time. I had to rewrite it a couple times because unfortunately the file got deleted as I was cleaning out my computer and trying to organize things. So I was like, great, now I'm gonna
Yeah,
have to rewrite it. So I've been working on that. But every day, I mean, it's like clockwork. I wake up, start my day, get everything going, have a cup of coffee. We sit and talk about our ideas, anything that's related to the business. Do a workout, do some grounding, some meditation, do some content, try to create some content that I hope that will resonate with somebody, and then maybe take a little nap, do a little sitting in the sun a little bit, and then just try to do some more work, and always doing a lot of reading. Like if you don't see me, I'm trying to read through this. I'm trying to go through PDFs. I'm trying to go through books. I'm trying, like, even if it's 9 o'clock at night, I'll be having a video playing and I'll be listening so that I can absorb it or whatever.
yeah,
But it just feels like what I really enjoy to do. And it's just wild because when I was in school, like I was telling you, all that stuff was so boring. Like I
mm,
just felt like I was like, this seems so dulling. And, you know, no insults to anybody with school and whatever, but I just realized I was like, just not for me,
it's not
and
for
this
me.
is
Yeah,
what it feels more for me and my soul. And spending a lot of time in nature, like all the time in nature, as much I spend time with the chipmunks. I'm always filming the chipmunks and feeding them, and always being with, nature as much as I can. Because the craziness of social media is something that is really trying to entrap you. That's a frequency as well.
yeah,
And, we really have to have this separation between the two. Otherwise, it'll just consume you and you'll just go nuts. And that's what they want, because that's energy or harvesting or,
yeah.
looshing or frequency stealing. And that's, the whole thing of pretty much why they gave people phones in the first place. But we're using them for the truth and for positivity.
Yeah, it's a trap for me too to get stuck in the vortex of just consuming information, but then going down to a particular point where you're too connected to a frequency and vibration, which is unnatural and inauthentic, to a large degree. But there's a synergy. I'm not sure if you would agree with this, but I say often to people that I hated my teachers, I hated learning, and school was not for me. And if you had asked me 25 years ago, well, when did I leave school? 29 years ago. Um, would you want to be a teacher, like go to university and be a teacher? I would have said, fuck no, I'm not going to be a teacher. Like, who would want to be why would I want to be the person that I disliked? I had all the run-ins and all the chaos with at school. Why would I go back to an environment that treated me terribly? I was bullied and harassed and all that kind of stuff all through my high school life and things like that. It's like, why would I do that? But it's interesting to know now that the largest part of my life and my passion and what I feel like is the purpose and meaning of what I'm here to do is to teach and to learn and to, provide information and help others and all that kind of stuff. Like, I'm a teacher. And if you had asked me 30 years ago, would you want to be a teacher? I just would have like scolded you. So do you relate to that?
Yeah, 100%. Because I wouldn't want to teach the things that I was learning, but the stuff that I learn now, I love teaching about it. Copper and mercury and all these different metals and different things, electroculture energy, atmospheric energy, the ether, all these things. It's so much fun because it's
Yeah.
such a different world. But the stuff, yeah, like you were saying, I mean, I would never. And originally a long time ago, I think I was like 17 or 18. I always thought I could maybe be like a kindergarten teacher or something, just
Yeah.
because it'd just be a fun day every day. And there's obviously no routine, and you just get to have fun, kind of, because it's kids and whatever.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I just kind of sit there and think like I feel the same way, and just the stuff that I was learning, I wouldn't want to repeat those things. And what really threw me off, was it was like third or fourth grade. I was really phenomenal at math. And I remember I was in this like in this class, and we were doing this game. And I remember the teacher said, Matt, I know you're good and you're great at math and whatever, but while we play this game, you're gonna have to sit by the side. And I was like, what? And he's like, because your team always wins. And he's like, well, we'll just have you as a referee. And I sat there and thought, wait a minute. So if I'm good at something, I should be put to the side? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So I remember after about that time, that was about that time frame, I was like, you know what? This just really isn't for me anymore. Because it's like, I think if someone's good at something, they should be boosted up. All people should be, because that means they have talents or skills, which should be, they should be boosted up. If a person's great at math, great at English, whatever it may be, boost them up, help them be better, because that's how we make a better society. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what my whole mission's been, trying to make a better society overall. And if we think about it that way, if we try to bring people down and be like, no, no, don't be smart, just kind of bring you all down to this, then what are we doing to society as a whole? And then you're going to punish them, which is funny, for not doing what they're supposed to do, which then you sit there and think that makes absolutely no sense. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what me and you just discussed of all the nonsense that we face. That's kind of what that is relating to. So, but yeah, back in the day, yeah, it was just mind blowing with that whole situation.
Yeah. It's crazy, huh? I really want to commend you on your work. I think like everything you just said in terms of how you deliver information, um, the style and manner in which you go in, like you don't just like shitbag people and throw something down someone's throats and force information upon them. You share it in a very diplomatic way and in almost like a, hey, look, I just wanted to show you this, and you just tell me what you think. And I know what I think, but I'm not going to force my ideas onto you. I just need to kind of maybe expose you to something that perhaps you haven't been had the privilege of looking at. You don't find the 18, 20 books that I do, so let me just share some information. And I think that sense of curiosity comes through with all of your videos and content. And then the other part of it with your supplements and the copper and all that kind of stuff, like it's it all ties in really nicely to help people live the best version of themselves. And I think that's really commendable. It's something that comes through this frequency now. Like when I talk to you, it's almost like we've had a couple of chats and we talk like we've been mates for years, because that's just that vibration again, like we kind of have a connection. I sense that you would do that the same with the people that you talk to. I mean, I'm just talking to people all the time that are like-minded, and then when you have conversations like this, I mean, if you come to Australia, we could catch up and have a coffee and go down the beach and hang out, and I don't think like it'll be like we went to school together.
Pretty much, I mean, that's kind of how I see it as. Like, yeah, I mean, if you were in person, I'm going to tell you the same thing that I told you today.
Yeah.
Like it's the same exact thing. I go into a grocery store, I say the same exact thing. I've said it to cashiers. Like, it
Yeah,
doesn't matter who the person is, they're going to hear it. But, I think that's important, because like you said, I will give the sources, I will show the books, I put them all out there, and I want to put them out there when it comes to books. I put in the captions, the titles and everything, and the PDFs or whatever. I want them to be out there because I want people to learn. I don't want to sit here and hold information and be like, it's all mine and whatever. No,
yeah, yeah.
people can read this, look at this book, look at these things, and just start to ask questions. And
Mm,
that's what today's podcast, if you really think about it, it's really just asking questions.
isn't it?
Look around and sit there and think, does anything look out of place? Like, just, look at the buildings and look at them and go, once you start doing it, you start going, wow, okay, all of this stuff looks out of place. And then this new stuff looks really out of place. But yeah, I mean, same connection it would be if we hung out or if I'm doing, a live on here too as well.
Yeah, yeah, good stuff. All right, Matt, I'll chuck all the links to Cultivate, Elevate, all your stores and all that kind of stuff, and chuck it in the show notes so people can find you. I encourage everyone to go and connect with you on Instagram and just have a look at the content that you put out. I think it's really fascinating stuff, and Again, just commend you on your work. Thanks for this chat, man. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll circle back again and catch up soon. And I don't know. Hopefully, one day we'll meet in person. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. I got to come. I got to go over there and go see all the kangaroos and all the beauty that's over
Yeah,
there as
man.
well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you for having me on. It was a blast. We'll definitely do another one. And then just, yeah, just let me know whenever it goes up. Send me
Yep.
the links and I'll pop it up as well too. Always
You're a
nice.
legend. Thank
All
you,
right,
man.
my
Have a
man.
great day,
I'll see
brother.
you. Have a
Bye,
great
man.
one.
Take
Bye
care.
bye.